we are going to look at your 8.4 notes, which is GCF factoring. So first we need to review what a GCF is, and then we can review how to actually factor using that. So first thing we need to remind ourselves is GCF stands for greatest common factor. And what that means is you are looking for the greatest or the largest number. Factor means can divide, so the largest number that can divide and that they have in common. So if you have a list of 2 numbers or a list of 3 numbers, you're looking for the largest one that can divide all of them. Okay, so we'll run through some examples of that first. So if you were to have numbers like 10 and 25, and I want you to find the GCF of 10 and 25. Some of these numbers, some of you might be able to very quickly find the GCF, and some of them are ones that you're going to have to take a little bit more time and effort to figure out. So I'm going to run through this as if you don't know what the answers are, and some of you might not know what the answer is. So if you don't know the GCF of 10 and 25, then I recommend you start with the smaller number and find all of its factors first. So obviously 1 is always a factor of everything. Then you would move on and you would check 2 and see if 10 can be divided by 2. Well, 10 is even, so obviously it can be divided by 2. Then you would move on and you would try 3. And if you're ever not sure, you can come to Desmos or whatever calculator you have, and you can type 10 divided by 3. And if you get a decimal, then the answer is no, doesn't work. So then you can move on and try 4, still doesn't work. You can try 5, that does work. So 5 is a factor of 10. You can go back and you can keep trying. You keep going until you hit the number itself. So 6 doesn't work. 7 doesn't work. 8 doesn't work. 9 doesn't work. And 10 is obviously going to work. Any number is divisible by itself. You stop once you get to 10 because anything larger than that is not going to work for you. So you always start with 1 and you count up until you get to itself. You pick all of the numbers that when you divide, you get a whole number. So 1, 2, 5, and 10 are the factors of 10. So now to find the greatest common factor, you need to figure out which number is also a factor of 25, and is the largest one. So in this case, you want to start with 10 and work your way down in this list of numbers because we're looking for the largest one. So if we figure out that 10 works, that would be your answer. If you figure out 10 doesn't work, you move on, try the next one, and so on until you find the one that works. Okay, so same process as before, except you're going to use these numbers to divide. So you can come back here to your calculator and you can type 25 divided by 10 if you're not sure. And if you get a decimal, then you know that that does not work. And then you can try the next one, which is 5. So you can do 25 divided by 5. And it does work, which means your answer, the GCF, is 5. You don't need to check 2 and 1 because we are looking for the greatest common factor, and we found it. Okay. Same thing will work if you have 3 numbers. So you want to start by finding all the factors of the smallest number. The smallest number is 8. You want to pay attention that it's not always in order. Smallest number is not always the first one. Okay. Pick the smallest one to start with. Find all of its factors. Obviously 1, it is even, so we know that 2 works. You can go down the list and check 3 through 8 if you need to using a calculator. So 3 doesn't work. 4, it does work. You can keep checking. You should be able to see that 5, 6, 7, if you check them on the computer or on your calculator, you would notice that they don't work. 8 is your other one that does. So now we've dealt with 8, so we move on with 16 and with 10. And we're going to check each one at the same time. So we're going to start with our largest and check to see if it works for 16, and if it does, check to see if it works for 10. Okay, if it works for both, that's your answer, you stop and move on. If it does not work, you try the next one. It has to work for both though. So we can come back here And we're going to try 16 divided by 8. And it does work, so we need to try 10 divided by 8, which does not work. So 8 is a factor of 8 and 16, but not of 10, so it is not your greatest common factor. So then you would move on and you would try 4 the same way. You try 16 divided by 4, which works. So you try 10 divided by 4, which does not work. So once again, 4 is not the greatest common factor. Now you can try 2. 16 divided by 2 works. And that means you try 10. 10 divided by 2, and it works. Since 2 works for all 3 of them, they can all be divided by 2. That means your GCF is 2. Okay. Now let's talk about variables. I'm going to show you a trick, and I'm going to show you what you learned. They are the same thing, just a different way of doing it. You do whichever one makes sense for you. So if you have a to the 4th, a to the 3rd, and a to the 4th. The trick, the easy way to deal with variables is if you look at all of your terms, and you look at each individual variable, and you look at their exponent. Whichever one has the smallest exponent is your GCF. So my exponents are 4, 3, and 4. The smallest one is 3, which means your GCF is a to the 3rd. The way you learned in class will get you the same answer, just takes a little bit more time and effort. The way you learn in class is to write down how many A's there are here. There are 4 of them. Then underneath that, write down how many A's this one has, which there are 3 of them. And then write down how many this one has, which there are 4 of them. Then you are going to cross out vertically, which ones they have in common. All 3 have to have in common. So there's A's in all of them. A's in all of them, A's in all of them. I can't cross these ones out because there's not an A here. All 3 of them don't have an A. So now I look to see that there are 1, 2, 3 that I crossed out, which means A cubed is your answer. Either method works. Either look for the smallest exponent, or in this case, you can write them all out and then cross out. Another example. Y to the 5th, Y to the 6th, Y to the 3rd, and Y. So my trick was to look for the smallest exponent. This one has a 5, a 6, a 3, and a 1. So the smallest exponent is the 1, which means your GCF is Y, or Y to the 1st. You can also write them all out like we did over here. This one has 5. The next one has 6. The third one has 3. And the last one has 1. And then you look for what they have in common. So you need to have them in all 4 terms. So there's a Y here, and that's it. You can't cross these ones out because there's not 1 here. So this gives you that you crossed out 1, so Y to the 1st is your GCF. Okay. Now let's put it together and find the GCF of terms. So let's say I have 2x squared plus 4x to the 3rd. So you look at each of the parts. You look at your numbers, and then you look at your variables. So you start with the GCF of the numbers, 2 and 4. The GCF of 2 and 4 is 2. 2 can divide 2, and 2 can divide 4. Just like we did up here at the top, if you weren't sure, you can list your factors and then find which one has in common with 4 also. Then you go to your variables. You can either use the trick or you can write them out, whichever way you preferred. So with the trick, we look for the smallest exponent. We've got a 2, we've got a 3, So the 2 is smaller, that gives you x squared. Or if you prefer to write them out, the first one has x squared means x and x cubed means x, x. Then cross out what they have in common. Can't cross this one out because there's not one here. So you cross that 2, which gives you x squared. So your GCF of 2x squared plus 4x cubed is 2x squared. If I look here at these, I've got 5a to the 5th plus 10. You start with the GCF of the numbers. So 5 and 10, their GCF is 5. 5 divided by 5 is divisible, and 10 divided by 5 is divisible. Then you look at your variables. I've got a to the 5th, and I don't have any a's here, which means your exponent is 0. So what's the smallest exponent? 5 or 0? 0, which means nothing. Also, if you were to write them out, the first term has a to the 5th. The second term doesn't have any, so you need to put a 0 here, which means can you cross any out? No, because they don't have any in common. So you don't have any a's. Your GCF is just 5. All right, now let's get into the actual factoring portion, which is what your IXL is going to do. Factoring is basically the opposite of distributing. So with distributing, you had something like 2 times 3x plus 4, and you would distribute and multiply to get 6x plus 8. Factoring is the opposite. So you're basically, it's like you're dividing. Your start is this, and your final answer will look like this. Okay? So let's go ahead and factor. Let's start with 10b to the 3rd plus 5b to the 5th. So start with finding your GCF, just like we did before. And we're going to divide by that GCF. So looking at your numbers, we've got 10 and 5. Their GCF is 5. And then looking at your numbers, looking at your variables, we've got b to the 3rd and b to the 5th. So smallest exponent is b to the 3rd. Or you can write them out. The first one has 3. The second one has 5. Cross out what they have in common. You crossed out 1, 2, 3 of them. Can't cross these ones out because there's nothing, which gives you b to the 3rd. That's your GCF. The GCF is your outside portion. Now inside, we're doing division. So we do 10 divided by 5 is 2. And b cubed divided by b cubed, which means I have 3, and I get rid of 3, which means I don't have any anymore. Or if you looked here, you cross 3 of them out, and now you have nothing left. So nothing after that too. Then 5b to the 5th divided by 5b to the 3rd. 5 divided by 5 is 1. b to the 5th divided by b to the 3rd. You have 5. You take out 3, which means b squared is left. Or you had 5. You cross 3 out, and now there's 2 left. And here is your answer. 5b to the 3rd, in parentheses, 2 plus 1b squared. Remember, you don't need the 1 here, so maybe you just have 2 plus b squared. Inside your parentheses is the same thing. Oops, didn't mean to write that parenthesis. Next example, we've got 14x to the 5th plus 7x squared plus 4 minus 14. So we need to look for GCF first. So looking at your numbers, we've got 14, 7, and negative 14. Now, negative 14 doesn't change your GCF, okay? It just will change your inside part of your parentheses later. So we care about the 14, the 7, and the 14 for now. They can all be divided by 7. Then we look at our variables. We've got an exponent of 5, exponent of 2, and no variables here, which means exponent of 0. So 5, 2, and 0, 0. Or if you write them out, you've got 5. The next one is 2. The last one doesn't have any. So you can't cross anything out, which means your GCF is just the number 7. Then you do your division. 14x to the 5th divided by 7. 14 divided by 7 is 2. We didn't do anything with our variables. 7x squared divided by 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. X squared. Or you can just put x squared if you don't want to put the 1. And then negative 14 divided by 7 is negative 2. There's your answer.